Hello everyone. As we approach your final paper, which is due in 2 weeks, I'd like to go over some key points just to make some clarifications. I know some of you have had some questions, and I want to ensure that you're all on the right track. And if you do indeed have questions, that hopefully this will make the final paper much more clear and concrete for you. So the idea behind this paper, behind this project, is for you to consider what the long-term financial or fiscal issues will be in the city or county that you've selected. So when you think about the paper from that perspective, I think it helps to understand what the actual goal is, and thinking about 5 years from now, 7 years from now, how will, let's say, the city of Redlands be fiscally? And really, for me, the genesis of developing a research paper for you all like this is based upon the fact that so much information is really left out of local government fiscal planning, and not just information left out, but in terms of preparing our localities for the future. So as you've seen in the research that I've made available on Blackboard and just from your own reading, that there are a lot of ways that people have tried to predict or assess the fiscal condition of a jurisdiction, whether that be a city, state, or county, or even the United States. So with that being said, I thought it became much more important for you all as students in public financial management to consider how would I really forecast to the best of my ability what is going to likely take place in San Bernardino, Redlands, or Riverside down the road, and how can I, given that information, what can be done to make fiscal improvements. And in addition, as you finish the program and move into your fields and move up in the ranks of the fields that you're currently in, this information will be vital and useful for you because it'll allow you to really think from a macro perspective in terms of what can be done to improve the fiscal condition where you work or where you live, but also from a micro perspective, because now you're enabled to really consider the strategies or the options that you have at your hand. So in terms of the actual paper, that's really the background, and one of the ways that I would consider or think about it. And we've gotten to the point where we're looking at or assessing financial conditions, and we've gone over our ratio analysis, but I don't want you to get so hung up on the fact that you have to include X amount of ratios or which ratios you should look to include in your paper. So ideally, you would really look first at a couple of specific ratios to help guide you, and I'll go over those quickly for you. First of all, the current ratio is important because it gives us a general outlook of what's going on in that city or county, where you look at the assets over the liabilities. And ideally, you'd want to look at that over a longer period of time. So not just 1 year or 2 years, but a 5 to 7 year period. So you can see if there are any trends, if they're emerging, how have things changed post-recession, etc. Another important set of ratios to also consider is the debt burden and the debt service burden. So in terms of your debt burden, obviously, you want to look at the long-term debt over the population of the jurisdiction. And this gives us an idea of how much we can expect as a jurisdiction, as a city or county, to be paying in our debt service in the foreseeable future. And as we take a retrospective approach, we can also obviously examine how much we've been paying in the recent past. And this will give us an idea on what is possible in the future, what is likely to occur, and how we can potentially make changes and make improvements in our jurisdiction. Well, the debt service burden is in a similar capacity. We'll look at the debt service over revenues. And this information, when you go to the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, is typically found in the Statement of Net Position. It may be called something else depending on the city that you're examining, but it's usually either the Statement of Governmental Expenses or the Statement of Net Position typically. And for your purposes, strictly looking at this fiscal sheet will be or should be sufficient in terms of really getting a general idea or understanding of what is going on in that city or county. So obviously think about it from the long-term perspective and what could be done to make improvements. And also for some of you, you've probably have or will select a city or county that has a fairly strong fiscal position. So just because the paper almost assumes that every city or county can make improvements, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to you conjure up things to show that it is in a bad position. If it's in a good position, then simply state that and explain why you think it is in a good position. If you read the management discussion and analysis section, that'll provide some feedback or some background so that you'll have an understanding of what is going on in that city or county. And again, this information, you really should focus on the CAFR. The budget documents may be helpful as additional information, but primarily here we're looking at the comprehensive annual financial reports. Now, getting into the actual paper, obviously you have your abstract, your introduction, and then when you're explaining the tools you use to assess the financial condition, again, you're primarily relying upon the comprehensive annual financial report. If you do include anything else, that is additional help. But the tools that you've used to assess the financial condition in that city or county is from the comprehensive annual financial report. You also want to discuss the years that you've examined, potentially why you selected those years. In a recent research paper that I've co-authored, we looked at the prevalence of user fees pre, post, and during the Great Recession. And the rationale was to see if states relied more heavily on user fees after the Great Recession as opposed to during and pre-recession. So you just really want to explain the rationale for your selection of data that you include. And then also, some students have asked questions on the component that asks the ethical issues raised by your recommendation. So for each of the fiscal issues that you've examined that potentially are problematic in that jurisdiction, and as a result, you'll make recommendations to address those situations. So, for example, if you find that the educational rate or the graduation rate is particularly low in a city, and you want to develop some type of job training or enhance the school system with an additional school or better facilities, the ethical conditions or ethical situations that may arise from that are something that you want to consider here. So if you were to suggest that an ethical situation that may arise may be the fact that now that you have allocated or you plan to allocate more money to education, perhaps that compromises money that you could potentially allocate to public safety or to another area. And then in that regard, it becomes somewhat of an ethical situation because now you're putting one priority in place of another, and obviously a city or county doesn't have an unlimited amount of money to rely upon. So as you're thinking about your recommendations, think about the unintended consequences that may arrive as a result of the recommendation that you've made. So that's really where the ethical conditions or situations are geared or generated from. The other thing that you may have some questions about is the federal and state policies that have an effect on the recommendation or the situation in that jurisdiction. So obviously there are lack or diminishing amounts of funds allocated to California by the federal government, and in addition, that has a trickle-down effect on what happens in different localities. So that's one thing, and you'd want to look at the specific revenue that has been allocated towards the state, In fact, that California actually sends more money to the federal government than most other states and gets less in return. So that's one issue. But within the state of California, there have been several measures that have passed and have not passed, and have they had an impact on any of the recommendations that you're making? To what extent has Proposition 13 had an impact on the recommendations you've made? Proposition 26, which has changed the amount or the extent to which tax and expenditure limitations can be passed in the legislature. So these are the things that you'll want to look at, and you'll want to point to actual examples to help support your point that you're making, and that'll help drive your point home much more clearly and coherently. So I think that's the main things I wanted to cover, wanted to convey. However, if you do have questions, certainly, we are about 2 weeks out from the final paper. If you do have questions, obviously feel free to email me or give me a call. I'll be traveling away to a conference next week, next Tuesday through the following Monday. So the best way to reach me will be email. However, if you want to set up a telephone meeting, I'll be able to do that as well. Just let me know 2 or 3 dates and times that are convenient for you, and I'll let you know when we can do that. I'll be in Atlanta, so it'll be a 3-hour difference. However, just let me know, and certainly we can cover any additional questions that you may have. All right, thanks a lot, and have a good week.